My name is Melissa Carter, and I am 32 years old. I work as the head nurse at one of the busiest hospitals in Denver. I have spent the last decade fighting for my independence, my career, and the quiet life I have built for myself. I thought I understood the worst that family could throw at me. I was wrong. It happened on a Friday night in April, the kind of night that should have been simple and unremarkable. I had stopped by my parents' house after a long shift to drop off a few groceries for my mother. She had been complaining about the price of produce, and despite our strained relationship, I still found myself trying to help. The house was dimly lit when I stepped inside. My parents were in the living room with my younger brother Kyle. I heard their voices before I saw them. I paused in the hallway, the sound of my father's voice cutting through the air. "Don't worry, we will make your sister pay for everything." My stomach dropped. The words were so casual, so confident, that for a moment I wondered if I had misheard. But then Kyle's voice followed. How he sounded more curious than concerned. "She has that good job in Denver. She bought that condo last year. She has money." My father's tone was low but firm, the same tone he had used to issue commands all my life. "She owes this family after everything we have done for her." I stood frozen, my back pressed to the wall, listening as they began to outline a plan. My mother's voice joined in, calm and certain. "Family helps family. She has done well for herself. Now it is time she gives back." A rush of heat moved through my body. My mind flashed back to a night almost 20 years ago when I was 14. My father had been drinking. He cornered me in the kitchen because I would not give him the cash I had earned babysitting. He slammed me into the counter, twisting my arm until something cracked. My mother had told the doctor I fell off my bike. I learned early that in our house truth was something to be hidden, especially when it made my father look bad. Kyle was never on the receiving end of that violence. He was the golden boy, the one who could crash a car at 19 and have me take the insurance hit to keep his record clean. The one who could skip work for weeks and still be called responsible by our parents. The more I listened that Friday night, the more I realized nothing had changed. The plan was simple in their minds. Convince me to take out a loan in my name to cover Kyle's debts. Dress it up as an investment, maybe a family business. Use my desire for some kind of connection with them as leverage. They spoke about it as if I were an object, a resource to be tapped. I stayed hidden until the conversation shifted to sports and weather. My hands were shaking as I backed out of the house the same way I had come in. My car was parked at the curb. I sat inside with the engine off, staring at my own reflection in the dark glass. In that moment, I knew two things. First, they would not stop until they got what they wanted. Second, I could not let them have the chance. The condo I had bought was more than an address. It was the first place I had felt truly safe. It was where I was raising Emily, the 7-year-old daughter of a patient who had passed away last year. I had just been granted permanent guardianship after months of paperwork. If my finances took a hit or my credit score dropped, I could lose her. The thought of that lit a fire in me that fear could not touch. I had spent my entire childhood and much of my adult life reacting to their demands, trying to survive their temper and their manipulation. But I was not that girl anymore. I was someone who had learned to handle medical emergencies, manage staff, and make life or death decisions in minutes. This was not going to be any different. By the time I turned the key in the ignition, I had already started planning my next move. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with exhaustion from my hospital shift. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands and went over every word I had overheard the night before. $85,000. That was the number Kyle had mentioned to someone months earlier when bragging about his gambling wins and losses to a cousin. Now I knew it was not a boast. It was real debt, the kind that came with late-night calls from lenders and interest rates designed to crush you. This was not just a case of him being irresponsible. He had taken loans from people who operated far outside the boundaries of legal finance. My father would never admit it, but I had no doubt that part of the urgency in their voices was fear of who Kyle owed money to. The stakes for me were higher than they could possibly imagine. I had just signed the final paperwork making Emily my legal daughter. It had been the hardest fight of my life outside of surviving my own family. Her mother had been a patient on my floor, a single parent battling cancer with no extended family willing to step in. Before she passed, she had asked me to promise to keep Emily safe. I had kept that promise through court hearings, home inspections, and endless interviews with social workers. My financial stability had been one of the key reasons the judge granted me custody. If my parents succeeded in pulling me into their scheme, and I took on debt, I could not justify I knew child services could revisit my case. In their eyes, any sign of financial instability could be grounds to question whether I was capable of providing for Emily. That thought alone made my stomach turn. But there was more. The condo was not just a home for us. It was my insurance policy against the kind of chaos I had grown up with. Every payment I made built equity, a buffer against emergencies, a tangible sign that I had built something on my own terms. If my name ended up on a loan for a fake business or a bailout for Kyle's gambling habit, all of that could be at risk. I imagined coming home from work to find a foreclosure notice on the door, Emily standing beside me asking what it meant. The idea made my hands curl into fists. At the hospital, I had seen what financial ruin did to people. Patients choosing between paying for medication or keeping the lights on. Families crammed into apartments they could barely afford because medical bills had eaten their savings. I had worked too hard to end up in that position because my family decided they were entitled to my income. My parents' version of family loyalty had always been a one-way street. I was expected to show up to help, to sacrifice, but never to need anything in return. They had made it clear from the time I was old enough to earn money that my resources were fair game. I had paid Kyle's car insurance after his accident. I had covered the deductible when my mother had minor surgery and claimed her insurance would not cover it. I had never once been repaid, and I had stopped expecting to be. But this was different. This was not a few thousand here or there. This was enough to destroy everything I had built, and it came with the risk of losing the person I loved most. That night in the hallway, I had also heard the way they talked about me like I was some disconnected ATM. They were not ashamed. They were confident. That meant they believed they knew how to get to me. They thought they could play on the part of me that still wished for a family who cared, who wanted me around for more than my bank account. They were wrong, but it also meant they were dangerous. People who believe they are entitled to something will go to great lengths to get it. I had seen that truth in patients' families, fighting over inheritances before the body was even cold. I had seen it in the way my father looked at me as a teenager, when I refused to hand over my babysitting wages. I knew that if they could not convince me, they might try to force me. That could mean forging my signature or using information only a family member would have to access my accounts. The thought made my skin crawl. I had to assume the worst if I wanted to be ready. The stakes were my home, my daughter, my career, and the sense of safety I had fought for since I was a child. Losing any one of those would be devastating. Losing all of them at once was unthinkable. I had to act before they did, and I had to make sure there was no way for them to touch what was mine. When people meet me now, they assume I must have grown up in a stable home to have the discipline and drive that got me where I am. I let them think that because the truth is far messier and far darker than most are prepared to hear. My earliest memories of my father are tied to the sound of a beer bottle clinking against the counter and the smell of cigarette smoke clinging to his clothes. Robert Carter was a man who could turn a normal evening into a minefield with nothing more than a bad mood. He believed in control through fear and discipline through pain. My mother, Carolyn, was not the type to protect her children. She was the type to smooth over bruises with long-sleeve shirts and tell me to stop provoking him. She would whisper that he worked hard and deserved respect, as if respect was something you could beat into a child. By the time I was 7, I understood that Kyle and I were not playing by the same rules. He could throw a tantrum in the middle of the grocery store and walk out with a new toy. I could come home with a perfect spelling test and get told I was arrogant. Kyle was the golden boy from day one. My father took him fishing and to baseball games while I stayed home to do chores. When Kyle broke a neighbor's window with a baseball bat, my father laughed and called it an accident. When I accidentally spilled juice on the carpet, he dragged me by the arm so hard my shoulder ached for days. At 14, I got my first taste of just how far their favoritism would go. I had been babysitting for a family down the street and saving for a secondhand laptop for school. One Friday night, my father came into my room reeking of whiskey and demanded the $60 I had hidden in a jar. I refused. He slammed me into the kitchen counter and twisted my arm until I felt a sickening crack. My mother drove me to the ER and told the doctor I had fallen off my bike. I learned in that moment that in our family, truth did not matter. Image did. Kyle never knew what it was like to be on the wrong side of my father's temper. When he crashed his first car at 19, my parents were frantic to protect him. They told the insurance company I had been driving and convinced me to sign a statement because I was the responsible one and could handle the consequences. That little lie cost me higher premiums for years, while Kyle got a new car and kept his record clean. My mother's manipulation was quieter, but no less damaging. She had a way of making me feel like every sacrifice I made was my own choice. When she needed help covering a bill, she would tell me how worried she was about losing the house, how she hated to ask, but there was no one else. I would hand over the money, and she would say I was a good daughter, the kind she could always count on. It took me years to realize that was just another form of control. The emotional abuse was constant. They dismissed my achievements while celebrating Kyle's smallest efforts. When I graduated nursing school with honors, my parents skipped the ceremony to attend one of Kyle's amateur baseball games. He did not even play that day. When I bought my condo, after years of saving my father's only comment was that the neighborhood was not as nice as where Kyle's friend had just moved. Every milestone in my life was met with either indifference or a subtle dig to remind me I was never quite enough. Kyle grew into adulthood without learning responsibility. He drifted from job to job, living at home rent-free, his expenses covered by my parents. When he maxed out credit cards, they paid them off. When he borrowed money from friends and could not repay it, my parents smoothed things over. They called it helping him get on his feet. What they meant was protecting him from reality. I was the opposite. I worked double shifts, put myself through school, and kept my head down. I learned early that asking for help was a waste of breath. If anything went wrong, it was on me to fix it. That upbringing shaped me into someone who could handle a crisis, but it also taught my family that I could be relied on to clean up their messes. That was the foundation for the conversation I overheard that Friday night. They had trained me to give without question, to absorb the blows, to carry the weight. They assumed that conditioning would hold, that no matter how outrageous the demand, I would find a way to meet it. What they did not understand was that the girl they had raised to be obedient and self-sacrificing had learned how to protect herself. They had mistaken survival for compliance. In truth, every sacrifice I had made for them had been another lesson in how little I could trust them. By the time I left for college, I had already begun building a life where they could not touch me. But no matter how far I went, or how much I achieved, the shadow of that house and the people in it followed me. Hearing them plot to take everything I had worked for was not a shock in the sense of disbelief. It was a shock in the sense of confirmation. They were exactly who I had always known them to be. The only difference now was that I had the resources and the will to fight back. The Monday after I overheard their plan, I decided to find out exactly what I was dealing with. I started with what I knew. Kyle's debts were not just credit cards and overdraft fees. Months earlier, I had seen a notification pop up on his phone while he was at my place, a reminder from a betting app about an upcoming game. When I asked him about it, he brushed it off as harmless fun. Now I knew better. During my lunch break, I used my hospital office computer to search public court records and found 2 small claims filed against him by payday loan companies. Each was for a few $1,000s. That was just the surface. I called an old friend from nursing school whose husband was a Denver police detective and asked hypothetically what someone should do if they suspected a family member was involved with illegal gambling. He told me the legal debts were the least of my worries. The real danger came from private lenders who operated without contracts, the kind of people who would not hesitate to threaten or harm someone over missed payments. That warning made my skin crawl. The next day, my mother sent me a text that was almost cheerful. "Dad wants to talk to you about a business opportunity. We think it could be great for the family." My stomach tightened. This was the beginning of the pitch. I ignored the message. That evening, I overheard another conversation, this time by accident, when my phone connected to my mother's Bluetooth speaker in her kitchen while I was on the porch. Her voice was low but urgent. "We just need her to sign the papers. She can handle the payments." Kyle mumbled something I could not make out, and then she said, "She will come around. She always does." Later that week, Kyle appeared at the hospital during my shift. He waited in the lobby until I came down. He looked thinner than the last time I saw him, his hair unwashed, but his smirk was the same. "You are still mad about whatever Dad said the other night?" he asked, pretending innocence. I told him I was busy and had nothing to discuss. He leaned closer. "Look, Mel, this is bigger than me. If I do not pay these guys, it will not just be me in trouble." That was the moment I realized he might actually try to scare me into helping. He was clumsy about it, but the implication was clear. I walked away without another word. At home that night, I checked my bank account and froze. There had been 2 failed login attempts that afternoon from an unfamiliar location. My heart pounded as I saw the security question they had tried to answer. "What is your daughter's birthday?" They were willing to use Emily to get to me. That crossed a line I did not even know existed. I called my bank immediately and set up additional verification steps, changing every password to a string of random numbers and letters I wrote down only once and locked in my safe. I added a verbal password for all phone transactions. I did the same for my credit cards and called the 3 major credit bureaus to put a freeze on my file. It was tedious and exhausting, but by the time I went to bed, I knew they could not open any account or loan in my name without my knowledge. Still, the sense of violation lingered. They had shown me their hand, and now I had to assume they would escalate. The breaking point came that Saturday, when I agreed to attend a family dinner at their house, partly out of curiosity and partly because I wanted to see how bold they would be face to face. Emily was spending the night at a friend's, so I had no distractions. When I walked in, the smell of roast beef and garlic bread filled the air, a domestic scene that looked perfect from the outside. We sat down at the table, and for the first half hour, it was the usual small talk about weather, neighborhood gossip, and Kyle's latest half-baked ideas for jobs he might take. Then my father cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on me. "Mel, we have an opportunity here, a chance to do something as a family." He reached under the table and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it toward me. My mother's eyes were bright with anticipation. Kyle looked smug. I opened the envelope and scanned the top page. It was a business loan application for $200,000, naming me as the sole borrower and guarantor. The business was listed as a car wash, with my father as managing partner and Kyle as operations manager. My name was on the ownership line, but there was no clause giving me control. My voice was steady but cold when I asked, "How much of this is going to cover Kyle's debts?" My father's jaw tightened. "That is not what this is about. This is about building something together." I pushed the papers back toward him. "No." His face darkened. "Think carefully. Opportunities like this do not come often." My mother chimed in, "Mel, you have always said you wanted the family to be closer. This is your chance." I looked at both of them. "I am not risking my home or my daughter's future for your scam." My father's voice dropped low, the same tone he had used when I was a child, and he wanted to intimidate me. "If you do not help, we will find another way." The words hung in the air like a threat. I left the table without another word, walked out the front door, and drove home. When I got there, I checked my email and saw a security alert from my bank. Another failed login attempt, this time from a device I recognized as my mother's old tablet. The security question was the name of my first pet, something only family would know. That was the moment I understood they were willing to commit outright fraud. They were not going to stop asking. They were going to try to take what they wanted. I sat on my couch with my laptop open, the loan application still vivid in my mind, and felt a shift inside me. This was no longer about saying no. It was about making sure they could never put me in this position again. The following Monday, I decided I needed more than just tightened passwords and frozen credit. I needed someone who understood how people like my parents operated and could help me stay a step ahead. At the hospital, I found Mark, a security supervisor and former Denver police detective, who sometimes came by the ER to check on our staff. I pulled him aside and asked if we could talk privately. In the small break room, I laid it out in plain terms, minus a few details about Emily, to keep her out of the conversation. His expression hardened as I spoke. "This isn't just family drama," he said. "If they're trying to use your personal information to open accounts or take out loans, that's criminal fraud. And if your brother owes the wrong people, they might see you as an easier target. You need legal backup, and you need to document everything." He gave me the number of a lawyer he trusted who specialized in financial abuse cases, especially those involving family members. That afternoon, I called her office and managed to get an appointment for the next day. The lawyer's name was Jennifer Hall. She was direct, calm, and had the kind of presence that made you believe she could dismantle any lie thrown her way. I told her about my upbringing, the overheard conversation, the loan application, and the attempted account logins. She didn't flinch. First, she said you need to secure every asset you have, transfer accounts to institutions they don't know, update all passwords, put fraud alerts on every account, and keep a log of every suspicious attempt. Second, we're going to create a file. Every email, text, voicemail, anything that shows intent to manipulate or defraud you goes into it. Third, and this is important, stop engaging with them in person, without a witness or recording if it's legal in your state. She explained that even if I didn't press charges immediately, the paper trail would make it nearly impossible for them to harm me financially without facing consequences. Before I left her office, she handed me a checklist and told me to call her as soon as I had the first batch of documentation. Driving home, I felt a strange mix of anger and relief. Anger that I needed to defend myself from my own family, and relief that I finally had a plan backed by someone who knew exactly how to handle predators in disguise. That night, I sat at my dining table and began pulling every text, every email, every bank alert into a single folder. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing for a fight I fully intended to win. By the next morning, my plan was in motion. Before work, I visited 2 separate banks and opened new accounts in my name, only using a mailing address at a secure P.O. box instead of my home address. I transferred every dollar from my existing accounts into the new ones, leaving just enough in the old accounts to avoid raising suspicion while preventing any significant loss if they somehow managed to gain access. I set up 2-factor authentication on everything linked to a secondary phone number they did not know existed. I went to my credit card companies and requested replacement cards with new numbers claiming potential fraud. Every account got a unique complex password that I stored only in an encrypted file on a device not connected to the cloud. Once my finances were locked down, I decided it was time to let them know I was not unaware of their scheme. I drafted an email addressed to my father, mother, and Kyle. It was short and unemotional. "I know about the debts. I know about the plan to have me take out a loan in my name. Any attempt to access my accounts or use my identity will result in immediate legal action. This is not negotiable." I sent copies of the email to my lawyer and to 2 relatives I trusted, Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jim, both of whom had quietly shown me support over the years. If things escalated, I wanted witnesses to my side of the story. That afternoon, I made one more move. I called an acquaintance from the hospital whose cousin worked in collections for a private lending group. I did not give details, but I mentioned that Kyle Carter might be looking to settle some debts and could be reached at my parents' address. It was not revenge exactly. It was removing myself as his safety net and allowing consequences to land where they belonged. 2 days later, my mother left a voicemail filled with accusation and venom. "How could you betray your own family like this? You're making things worse for your brother." I saved it to the evidence folder without responding. My father texted next, "You've made a mistake. You think you're safe, but you're not." That one went straight to my lawyer, who told me to keep my distance and let her handle any further threats. For the first time in years, I felt like I was ahead of them, no longer reacting, but actively controlling the situation. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could dismantle their leverage over me entirely. It did not take long for the fallout to begin. 3 weeks after I sent the email, Kyle's car disappeared from my parents' driveway. Later, I heard from a neighbor that 2 men in an unmarked tow truck had taken it in the middle of the night. Word was Kyle had been forced to sell it along with some of his electronics to make a partial payment on his debts. My father tried to open a small business line of credit in my name at a bank 2 towns over, but the application triggered a fraud alert thanks to the freezes I had placed on my credit file. The bank flagged it and notified the police who paid my father a visit. My lawyer called me the next day to tell me there was now an open investigation into attempted identity theft. Kyle, in the meantime, had been confronted by the very people he owed money to. I did not know the details, but I heard enough from a mutual acquaintance to understand it had been a rough encounter. He was seen with a split lip and a limp a week later. My mother tried to shield him from the worst of it, but her own situation took a hit when the school district, where she worked as an administrative assistant, learned of the police inquiry involving her and my father. Within a month, she was placed on leave, and by the end of the semester, she was officially terminated for violating the district's code of ethics. My father's name appeared in a local news brief about the investigation, which included charges of fraud and falsifying loan documents. The article was short, but in a small town, it spread fast. By the time summer rolled around, they were pariahs in the very community they had spent years trying to impress. The irony was not lost on me. All their scheming to preserve their image had led to the one thing they feared most: public humiliation. I watched it all from a distance, not with glee exactly, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that for once, the consequences had landed exactly where they belonged. With the worst behind me, I found myself breathing easier for the first time in months. The constant knot of tension in my shoulders began to loosen, and I noticed I was sleeping through the night without waking up to check my phone for bank alerts. Emily and I settled into a new routine that felt calm and safe. I no longer dreaded unknown numbers calling my phone or unexpected knocks at the door. Instead, my time and energy went into building the kind of life I had always wanted but never thought was possible. I joined a local support group for women who had escaped abusive family dynamics, and in those weekly meetings, I found something I had been missing for years: people who understood without judgment. Hearing their stories helped me see my own choices in a new light. I was not cold or ungrateful for cutting ties. I was protecting myself and my daughter. Slowly, the old belief that I had to earn love and acceptance began to fade. In its place grew a quiet confidence that I was enough as I was. At work, my focus sharpened, and I took on a mentorship role for younger nurses. Seeing them succeed reminded me of the power of guiding someone toward independence rather than trapping them in dependence. At home, Emily's laughter filled the rooms, and our small victories, her learning to ride a bike, my baking a cake that didn't collapse, felt like the real milestones. The absence of my parents and brother was no longer a loss. It was space for something better. For the first time, I understood that my worth was not tied to what I could give or sacrifice. It was mine unshakable, and I intended to protect it. Looking back now, I can see that leaving was never about punishing them. It was about breaking a cycle that had been in motion long before I was born. My parents taught me that family loyalty meant unquestioning sacrifice, that love was conditional on my usefulness, and that boundaries were selfish. They were wrong. Walking away was not selfish. It was survival. It was choosing to protect what I had built from people who had shown me over and over that they would destroy it without hesitation if it served their needs. I share my story because I know there are others out there, still standing in the hallway overhearing the conversation that will change everything, feeling that sick weight in their stomach and wondering if they are overreacting. You are not. If someone shows you that they see you only as a resource, believe them the first time. You do not owe them access to your life, your money, or your peace just because you share a last name. Emily and I sit on our balcony in the evenings, now watching the sun dip behind the mountains. She talks about school and friends, and I listen without that constant buzz of dread in the back of my mind. This is what safety feels like. This is what it means to live on my own terms. Family is not always the people you are born to. Sometimes family is the people you choose, the ones who value you for who you are, rather than what you can provide. I have learned that protecting yourself financially is often the first step toward protecting yourself emotionally, and that once you set those boundaries, the right people will respect them. The wrong people will fall away, and that is okay.